Welcome to Bryan Lomax Movie Talk and my top 50 horror movies. Yes, I've done top 50 comedies, I've done top 50 action, and now I'm on to horror. Now, I'm doing these in conjunction with Cody Leach, who is, he's making similar videos. We're releasing them at the same time, so if you haven't checked them out already, do go and check them out as well. He'll be dropping his top 50 horror today, along with mine. So yeah, I did say in the previous videos the stuff that we kind of always have to say when we're doing these, which is, these are subjective. This is my list, not your list. So you don't need to get offended if I leave something off or don't put something high enough. There are also a few films on this list, a handful of films on this list, I would say that many people will probably argue isn't horror and will say, oh, it's a thriller, not a horror. I personally don't think so myself. I think the definitions of what makes a thriller and what makes a horror have become significantly blurred over recent years. For me, a thriller should thrill you and a horror should horrify you. So yes, I stand by my reasoning for any film that appears on this list as being a horror. May not be the only genre that the film kind of sits in. There will be a few films on here that sit in multiple genres, but if they do so, then I would say that they are probably equally weighted. With that in mind, let's get into my top 50 horror movies of all time.
Mom, there are people next door.
Oh, I guess the new owner's moving in. It's supposed to be very attractive.
The original Fright Night is just a really good, fun vampire movie. It's before the era of Twilight, kind of making vampires not that cool anymore. This is at a time when vampires were a threat, a genuine threat. And Chris Sarandon in this is really great as Jerry Dandridge. It's just, there's a lot of really creative visual effects on here, physical effects. Maybe not dated all that well, but even so, I still take physical over CGI any day of the week, and it's one of the reasons that this remains a better film than the remake. From vampires to werewolves, we've got Ginger Snaps. This is a teenage drama, really, that kind of... It's a werewolf film, but it is really a metaphor for puberty, for women, for going on your period, so to speak. It's obviously something I can't relate to because I'm a man, but the film does a pretty damn good job of using the werewolf mythology to illustrate the hardships that a woman goes through, shall we say, once she reaches that period of her life when a certain time of the month becomes a regular feature in her life. That sounds a lot more I don't know, unappealing, I guess, when I say it like that. But if you haven't seen Ginger Snaps, I highly recommend it because it's a lot of fun. It's quite irreverent. It's got some really great characters in it, and some, again, really good practical effects. They don't look spectacular, the practical effects at the end of this film, but again, because they're physical, because they feel like something you can reach out and touch, it's just better. American Psycho really kind of hinges on what is an amazing tour de force performance by Christian Bale. So this is pre-Batman Christian Bale. He plays someone who's absolutely nuts, quite frankly. And by the time we get to the end of the film, he may be so nuts that most of the stuff that has happened might just actually be inside his head. So yeah, it's got an interesting ending that can be read in multiple ways, I guess. But it's a really great film. And again, like I say, it's mostly down to that performance by Christian Bale. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is one of the films that, you know, like I talked about in my introduction, where a lot of people would say it's a science fiction movie. I argue it's a sci-fi horror, but that it is kind of equally weighted. I think there are things in this film that, you know, you wouldn't show a child because the horror element is quite prevalent. It is a horror film, you know, as much as it is a sci-fi film, it is a horror film. There are some pretty horrific elements in it, and some stuff that's really quite creative. You know, again, the practical effects. So the practical effects on this film were done by the gentleman whose name escapes me at the moment, who did the practical effects work for The Thing, which is arguably, you know, some of the best practical effects work ever made. Well, you know, if you've seen The Thing and you liked The Thing, but you haven't watched Invasion of the Body Snatchers, check it out, because if you like that kind of stuff, if you like that physical effects work, you'll find it here as well. You know, when you think about these aliens that kind of take over people, take over their bodies, or kind of copy their bodies, and they go into these pods and they come out of these pods and all that stuff, physical effects work, it's really, really good. Some random stuff in there as well that even today just looks quite horrific. This one bit where this dog has got like a human face on it. Very cheaply done effect, but very effective. Like I say, even today I saw that, because I didn't see this film for the first time until fairly recently. I think like a couple of years ago. Reviewed it on my channel, so check that out. But yeah, that effect caught me off guard. I didn't expect that, and it was quite horrific. Sent a shiver down my spine. So Invasion of the Body Snatchers, really great sci-fi horror. Dog Soldiers comes from the Descent director Neil Marshall, and it is, for my money, personally, the best werewolf film ever made. I know a lot of people will argue American Werewolf in London and all that. For me, this one is just a blast. It doesn't have anything particularly important to say. It is literally just about the fun and the horror of getting this group of Marines together who are being picked off by a group of werewolves. They batten down the hatches in this house in the middle of this forest. And again, like I say, it's bloody, it's brutal, it's at times hilarious. You know, if the sight of someone trying to hold on to their innards while a werewolf is kind of whipping off with them, it doesn't make you laugh, then this isn't the film for you. But yeah, I found it highly entertaining, and yeah, like I say, it's not going to get the brain box ticking over much, but it's certainly going to be entertaining. Life is a sci-fi horror in the vein of Alien. Obviously, since Alien and Aliens, we've had many rip-offs, many copycats that have never really lived up to the heights of those first two Alien films. But hey-ho, that's fine, whatever. That happens all the time. Classic films come out, you get a lot of copycats. Life is one of those copycats. It just so happens to be one of the best, for my money, personally. You know, it takes a lot of the beats from Alien and just runs with it, but it does it in a really entertaining way and quite a horrific way at times. You know, the spoilers, the way that Ryan Reynolds' character cops it fairly early on is pretty horrific, it must be said. And I didn't see that coming because obviously he's one of the main stars of the film and he's a big name. So I would have expected him to last till the end. He doesn't, and it's quite shocking when it happens. Great creature design, really effective. You know, I love the way this thing moves. It's pretty scary, and the ending is just, yeah, pretty gnarly. It's one of those endings that it doesn't end on a positive note, put it that way. Just kind of, yeah, beats you around the head, leaves you in the gutter, end credits, boom. Drag Me to Hell is Sam Raimi at his best. For me, quite literally, because this is my favourite Sam Raimi film. I think he takes all of the tics and techniques and creativity that he kind of, you know, like invented on the Evil Dead films, and he puts it here, but in a story that is much more solid, much more kind of fleshed out, a really great kind of character journey for this central character, creative special effects, physical stuff. It's scary, but it's funny at the same time. You know, there's moments that make you jump out of your skin, and there's moments that just make you just laugh your socks off, and some that do both at the same time. The moment when the main character, this woman, is in the grave of this gypsy woman, and just, you know, the stuff that goes on there, it's both hilarious as well as creepy and disgusting. And yeah, basically it's Raimi taking everything he's learned across the course of his career and just having fun with it.
The house is burning. Your daughter's in the house. It's not too late.
The Dead Zone is quite simply one of the best Stephen King adaptations. At one point it was my favourite Stephen King adaptation. It's just a really solid story, and it's perfectly executed by director David Cronenberg, who obviously is a man who likes physical kind of body horror type stuff. If you know his work, all of that is present here. But like I say, the story hinges on a central performance, or the execution of the story hinges on a central performance by Christopher Walken that is brilliant. He's absolutely magnetic in this film. He's extremely watchable, and whenever he's on screen, I'm kind of glued to the screen. He's something about his face, the way he talks, that just makes him endlessly watchable. You know, Christopher Walken doesn't get to lead that many films. He's often the supporting player. He's the guy you bring in to take a supporting role and make him do something with it that elevates your film, because he's just that good. He doesn't get that many leads. This is one of the few leads he has gotten in his career, and it's stellar. It's a great performance, and it really lifts the material, I think. It turns what is a pretty decent Stephen King story into something that's really great. Martin Sheen as well, making for some excellent support. I really love Martin Sheen. So yeah, one of Stephen King's best. The Relic is a horror film, a creature feature that any opportunity I get to tell people about it, I take it. So even though it is a film I've talked about a few times on my channel before, even though I've never actually done a straight up review, yeah, I will jump at the chance and talk about it again. If you've not seen The Relic, check it out. If you like creature features, this is one of the best. It's got a creature that is designed by Stan Winston, the man who gave us The Predator and, you know, worked on The Terminator and things like that. He is a master of the craft when it comes to creating monsters and creatures and all that kind of stuff. But it's just a really solid horror film that's got a lot of atmosphere, a lot of good tension, and then when the creature is finally revealed, it's like, yes, that is a top tier creature. So yeah, I love the Relic. I think the director, Peter Hyams, is one of the most unsung, underrated directors out there. He acts as cinematographer on his own movies. You know, he produces them, directs them. He's an auteur, I think, but he doesn't get the credit that an auteur would normally be given. And I don't really know why that is, because actually he's made some really great genre movies. Back to David Cronenberg now with what is arguably, for me at any rate, his best film. You know, talk about body horror, boom, The Fly. It's yeah, absolutely chock full of body horror. Certain elements in this film that stuck with me watching them as a child. The arm wrestling sequence when he snaps the guy's arm. Yes, this is about a guy who's just going through this transformation, turning into this fly. And it's tragic, it's sad, it's, yeah, you feel for this guy. He's not really a villain, he's a scientist whose experiment went wrong because a fly got trapped inside it, and now he's turning into something that he doesn't want to become. And yeah, it's a bit of a love story with him and Gina Davis's character. And like I say, because of what ends up with him and how she's the one who has to kind of put him out of his misery, it's just a film that has aged very well. You know, it holds up even today in concept and execution. You know, there's a couple of elements when we're looking at computer screens that obviously feel dated. Can't really get around that. But as far as the effects work goes and the story and the character stuff, it just, yeah, it works. It still works. It still holds up. The original Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Now this is a film, one of the films on this list that I'm pretty sure most people are probably shouting at the screen now saying, that's not a horror, it's a thriller. Now I define horror as any film that horrifies you. You know, that to me is the definition of horror. You know, a thriller should thrill you, a horror should horrify you. Girl with a Dragon Tattoo does not thrill me, okay? If you go back to the original kind of definition of a thriller, you're looking at Hitchcock films like North by Northwest, you know? Films that kept you on the edge of your seat because they were so thrilling. That's a thriller. Girl with a Dragon Tattoo, to me, is not that. It is horrific. Some of the stuff that happens in here, you know, there's 2 rape scenes in this film. One against a woman and then one by that woman against the man who had attacked her. All that stuff is alone is horrific to watch, horrific to see. But then when you factor in this whole murder investigation in which they're looking for this serial killer, and then when they find that serial killer at the end and she's trapped in the house with him, all of that stuff, it fits right into the tropes of a horror movie. To me, it is more horrific than it is thrilling. So yeah, Girl with a Dragon Tattoo, it's a horror movie. It's a horror thriller. I get the, you know, the modern definition of a thriller. This probably fits into it, but for me, it doesn't thrill me all that much. It horrifies me. The Babadook is one of the best kind of recent horror movies. You know, you think about what classics we've had recently. There's probably not that many, but this is certainly one of them. It's a very divisive film amongst the horror community. I think you kind of 80s slasher type horror fans are probably quite down on the Babadook most of the time. I think Babadook is more aimed at your kind of art house type of horror fans. I'm kind of a lover of both, really. For me, it's all about story and character, and this has it all. It's a film about motherhood and about loss and about dealing with that loss and how it creates tension in relationships. And so it's a story of this mother coming to terms with the loss of her husband and how that impacts her relationship on her son. But it's all told in the guise of a horror film, and it's brilliantly executed once again by a female director, it must be said. So yeah, it's a great film. It Follows is another one of those films that kind of sits within the Babadook camp, you know, school of horror filmmaking. It's more your art house kind of film. I know a lot of people amongst the horror community don't really see the appeal, think it's overrated. I don't think it's overrated. I think it's great. It's one of the few films that's really kind of put the fear in me. You know, I watched this and then I did, you know, you walk home at night on your own, you feel uneasy. You know, it did with me anyway. It's just like the fact that whatever it is, could be anyone, could be lurking in any shadows. You know, the film's shot in a lot of wides and it just creates this tension where anything that is coming on screen could be it. And it's just, yeah, it's incredibly shot, it's incredibly acted. The concept is quite fascinating, and it's surprising that nobody came up with it sooner, quite frankly. It's a pretty simple concept, but very effective, very scary, and has quite a lot of mileage in it. I'm surprised there hasn't been a sequel. To some degree, I'm glad there's not been a sequel, but I am surprised. HITCHER is one of my favourite movies of the 80s. It's one of Rutger Hauer's best performances, coupled with Blade Runner. I think he really kind of put out some stellar work in the early 80s. And yeah, like I say, The Hitcher is one of those films that just dug its claws into me at a very early age and has stayed with me since. And when I go back and revisit it, it always holds up. It's just a great cat and mouse game. You know, this man who we have no idea where he came from. We only get given scraps of information that clue us into who he might or what he might be. And yeah, it's just him terrorizing this young man. And it's very dark. It goes places you wouldn't expect. And yeah, like I say, it's one of the best movies of the 80s, horror or otherwise. Under the Skin is a recent sci-fi horror film. I'm sure a lot of people would probably say the emphasis is on sci-fi, but for me it was quite horrific to watch. There's a lot of scenes in this that yeah, really make you stomach churn. But it's trippy. There's some really trippy visuals. You know, it's got this alien who comes to Earth and lures these men into her domain. For some other kind of alien entity, you get the sense she's essentially a worker bee for whatever the queen is or the king, whatever. And yeah, lures these men in with the promise of sex and drops them off at this house where something kind of swallows their essence, so to speak. But she starts to be amongst humans a bit too long and sort of starts to develop this conscience where she doesn't really want to do what she's doing anymore and kind of runs away from that responsibility she's been given. And yeah, it's just this again, like I say, some of the visuals, extremely trippy, quite horrifying in many respects. And again, you know, when we get towards the end and we see what happens to her character, that as well is also truly horrifying, because it makes a comment on the nature of humanity in many ways. So yeah, it's a film that more people need to see. It is an absolute classic as far as I'm concerned. First time I watched this, I've only seen it once actually. I still need to revisit again, but it made such an impact on me watching it. I think that's one of the reasons I've not revisited it, to be honest, because I don't want to lose the impact that it had. I have reviewed Take Shelter on my channel before, so if you want to know my in-depth thoughts on the film, please do search for that video on my channel. But it goes without saying that this is a film that deserves more attention. It's one of those films that, again, it's a bit art housey, and many people, I would say, would argue it's thriller, not horror. But personally, I'm not thrilled by it in any way. It's not one of those films that like takes me on a thrill ride. I find the idea of it quite horrific. It's about a man who is potentially losing his mind. You know, when you can't trust your own perception of the things that are going on around you. That to me is quite horrifying. When you think about dementia, that to me is something that is horrifying to think about. I've always said that if I'm one of those people who develops dementia, I would rather you just put me out of my misery, quite frankly. Yeah, this film deals with and explores that concept. Is the stuff that this guy is seeing real, or is it all in his mind? Is it all in his family history? Because his mother suffers from dementia. So yeah, there's a few visuals in it that are also very off-kilter. You know, a bit when he goes in his house and he sees his wife and she kind of picks up this knife. The way that's shot, again, it's shot like a horror movie. It's not shot like a thriller. So yeah, it's very low-key. You know, it's not the kind of horror that goes boo or anything like that. It's very kind of thought-provoking, but it's a horror film nonetheless, and one that I strongly urge people to check out because it's just a brilliant film.
In darkness, there can be light.
Pan's Labyrinth for me is still Guillermo del Toro's best film. Surprisingly, again, I've not reviewed it on my channel, although I've reviewed most of his other work. But yeah, for me, still his best work, still his masterpiece. Incredibly written, brilliant characters and character arcs in the film. Just incredible creature design. You know, some really horrific looking monsters. And just the idea that actually anything in real life, anything within humanity can be more horrific, more monstrous than any kind of fantasy world creatures that we might create in our own minds. Yeah, human monsters, so to speak, are always more real and always more frightening than fantasy world monsters. So yeah, that's essentially what the film kind of says to a large degree. But it's heartfelt, it's touching, it's violent, it's scary. It's a really great film. It's Del Toro's masterpiece. Both Zodiac and Sixth Sense, again, are those films that many will argue are thrillers, not horrors. I disagree for all the reasons I've already stated. Sixth Sense, to me, it's a horror because, one, there are a few scenes in it that are really spine-tingling. You know, that scene where the main character sees the ghost of that kid who says, "Come on, I'll show you my dad's gun," and then he turns around and you see that he's had his brain blown out. That every time I watch that, it creeps me out. It's the way it's shot, the way Shyamalan expertly orchestrates those sequences. Again, it's quite horrific. The idea of this child seeing these images, seeing these ghosts that no child should see or have to see, and yeah, you know, seeing people hanging from the rafters in his school. It's a horrific idea. So yeah, and again, as I've always said, for me, any film, no matter the genre, is about character and story. And Sixth Sense has both of those in spades, particularly character. The character development throughout this is incredible. You know, a lot of people talk about the twist ending with Bruce Willis's character. For me, the real ending is that between the boy and his mother. And you know, she's spent this whole film thinking something might be wrong with her son, and he finally comes clean with her and tells her what he's seeing, what he's going through. She doesn't believe him at first, but then once he starts to tell her some of the stuff that can't come from anywhere else, and she believes him, and there's this really emotional payoff, I think. And every time I watch the film, it gets me. You know, it gets me at an emotional level. And for me, that's the real ending of the film. That's the one that isn't just about clever tricks. It has an emotional punch that gets me every time. But like I say, the film itself, it's quite some cold moments in it. Some moments that really do kind of send shivers down the spine. So yeah, really great horror film, and still to this day, Shyamalan's best film. So Aliens is, of course, my number one. This is a film I've kind of talked about ad nauseum this past year on my channel, having reviewed the Alien films, having done a 31 on 31, in which this film was number one on the, on our most recent 31 on 31. A lot of people probably screaming at me now saying, it's not horror, it's action. No, it's sci-fi horror action, and it's equally weighted in all three of those, I would say. This is a film that scared my brother when we saw it as children, because the horror element that is in it really got to him. You think about some of the attacks on the people in this. You think about the scene with the face huggers in which Ripley and Newt are locked in that room together. The Alien Queen, this is a creature feature. These monsters, these aliens are, what other kind of movie will you get them in other than a horror film? Yeah, this is a horror film. This is undoubtedly a horror film. It is, of course, an action film too, because the action is balls to the wall. It is just, yeah, James Cameron doing what he does best with action, but it's also a science fiction film that's got something to say about motherhood and, stuff like that, which I went over in my review. So if you want to know my in-depth thoughts on the film, check out that review. But yeah, for me, it is one of those films that has everything, great drama, really well written characters, fantastic action, some scary elements of horror, and a really great science fiction concept. It's one of the best films ever made for that reason, that it covers so many bases and does each of those bases to perfection. Every time I watch Aliens, it holds up and it gets better. So yeah, Aliens for me, best horror film of all time. I'm sure that will upset some people because they'll be adamant that it's more action than it is horror, but I've explained myself. If you don't like my explanation, tough. But yeah, there you go. That's my top 50 horror movies. But what are yours? If you can't do a top 50, then just, do a top 5 or a top 10. Let me know what your favourite horror films are. Let me know which ones on my list you agree with, and let me know which ones on my list you don't agree with. Thank you for watching this video. Do check out Cody Leach's video if you haven't already. And until next time, cracking.